Beats by Dallas, make it hurt.
Hello and welcome to Project Passion, the podcast made to inspire you to follow your passion and turn it into a successful business or career. This week we are back. I'm actually super excited for this podcast. I have Brodie Sharpe on the show. Brodie is a physiotherapist and the host of the Run Smarter podcast. All links obviously will be in the description. Do you want to throw a review, Brodie? Do you want to kind of explain to people and to me, because obviously I don't know so much about you other than what you'd sent me beforehand and the research I'd done. Do you want to kind of break down who you are, what it is you're doing?
Yeah, so hi, Johnny. Thanks for having me on. I am from Melbourne, Australia. I grew up playing basketball. Basketball was my team sport of passion and was constantly injured, constantly with rolled ankles and a few niggles here and there. So constantly seeing a physiotherapist trying to treat my injuries. Loved what the knowledge they have, loved what they got me back to playing pain-free. So naturally extended my interests into physiotherapy. So went into uni and graduated as a physiotherapist. And it was probably about 2 years into my physio career that I became a runner. Like I was working in private practice and just like seeing anyone under the sun, and was still playing basketball at that time. But about 2 years in, went traveling. Went to North America for 6 months and drank a lot of beers, got really unhealthy, came back and was unfit and looking for my next thing to do. And my sister was training, or just decided to train for a half marathon and needed some accountability, and asked if I wanted to train with her.
Nice.
And I reluctantly agreed and noticed, like, I quickly caught the running bug. You might have heard this thing exists. It was probably 3 or 4 weeks in that I just loved it, absolutely loved it, and was loving the effects that it was giving me. It was making me feel good about myself. I was obviously getting back into shape, which was a good thing as well. And recognized as soon as I caught that bug, whenever I'd see a runner in my physiotherapy clinic, I just had this heightened passion. I would like not only deliver better quality physio, but because it was bringing out a better side in me. But I was just walking away from those consults, like just buzzing, because I'd be talking about what running goals they have, like what's their running technique, what shoes they wear, all this sort of stuff, and recognize it just like upon self-reflection, I just need to spend more time around this population.
Yeah.
And because it's bringing out the better side of me and it's making me deliver better quality to my clients. And just natural extension, just decide to niche down into my own clinic and start what I've got today.
Nice. So was physiotherapy what you always wanted to do, or did you have, like, when you were a kid, did you have like that dream job that everyone has and then it kind of changed? Because it'd be interesting to see what was the sort of variance, what you wanted to be and what you ended up doing.
Well, I guess kind of growing up playing basketball, it was always going to be a professional basketballer.
Yeah, I thought it was going that way.
It didn't end up happening, but I think a very close second would have been the physiotherapy thing. So I guess that was me dreaming big, and reality hits as soon as you get to like your late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, like you said, your biggest interest in physiotherapy is helping other runners, and so obviously what you have, your business now for, you have your podcast for. But what was it to kind of give you that spark, that running as opposed to something? Was it just the fact that you were yourself a runner now? But was there nothing else that coming into the clinic you thought, like, they're good injuries or something you like to deal with, rugby or anything they got there, but running was just the one you were most interested in?
I think it was because when I became a runner myself, I also became an injured runner very quickly. And I would realize that I'd delve into the research. I didn't know much about running or running related injuries when I was working in private practice. I knew how to get by. I knew how to essentially treat most of the common injuries to some extent, but I didn't really delve really deep into the details on how to effectively do it until I became a runner myself and did my own research. And it was probably about 2-3 weeks into my running career that my calves blew up. They had extreme tightness, extreme soreness straight away. About 6 weeks into running, my knee went, and it was an old injury from basketball, but that started to rear its ugly head. And I was just managing injuries, and it was, looking back on it now, it was just me trying to adapt to a sport, an endurance sport that I just wasn't adapted for.
Yeah.
And it was just like almost like growing pains, just trying to start doing something that I wasn't used to. But it was the frustrations along with the pains and the anxieties and the like confusion of what to do, all of these emotions when a runner is injured, and then you have a race coming up and you're like, well, am I going to be ready for that race? How do I prepare for this race? All those frustrations I would also see in a runner that would come into the clinic. And so I'd kind of empathize with them, and kind of, I'd know the spot that they're in. So it would tap into a deeper level of connection with them. So I guess apart from me obviously loving running at that stage, it was having that empathetic connection as well.
Yeah, good. So obviously, like, as people see, if you go across and look at Brodie's Instagram, any of his content, a lot of it is tips. It's, breaking these misconceptions, myth busting these things, because, everyone does it. It's the first thing you do. As soon as you hurt yourself, as soon as you get something wrong, you go and Google it. And it's probably the worst damn thing you could possibly do for yourself is go and Google, because it's always going to give you the worst case scenario. And a lot of your content obviously tries to break these misconceptions and some of these bad practices. So what would you say would sort of be like even your top 5 sort of beginner injuries that people could avoid if they just run smarter as you try to teach?
Yeah, and I 100% agree. The Googling, and a lot of people go into running Facebook groups and ask them as well. And the quality of answers that you get is just super low. Not only low, but a lot of it is contradicting as well. People say like you should stretch. Some people say you shouldn't stretch. Some say you need to rest the injury. Some say no, you just need to stay active and exercise through it. And ice, heat, all this sort of stuff. It's super contradicting and leaves people really, really puzzled, which takes me into the social media side of things, because in clinics I was constantly reiterating a lot of these concepts and trying to address a lot of these myths and misconceptions that runners hold. And so that was what led me into publishing like posts and blogs and podcast episodes, just trying to educate people around, okay, this is what the research shows, this is the facts, this is the misconceptions, we'll bust those. And just my goal, my mission is to provide clarity and control to every runner. That's kind of like my mission. And the clarity and them gaining control in their running is helps. It's very impactful, that kind of statement for runners. So the top 5 injuries that I currently see, one is knee pain. So there's several diagnoses around the knee, but commonly, especially in female runners, the knee is definitely the problematic area. And that's just naturally because there's a lot of load that goes through that knee when people run. And if they run too much too soon, if they have a huge spike in load, mostly it's the knee that will react. I see things further down. So like Achilles, like the Achilles tightness, Achilles soreness, Achilles tendinopathy, that structure tends to be quite sore. Shin splints is a very common one. So pain on the front of the shin. Plantar fasciitis is another one. Or it's the more common, or the more accurate terminology is plantar fasciopathy, because itis refers to inflammation, and we've now shown there's not a lot of inflammation in that area.
What actually is that injury then in sort of layman's terms?
In layman's terms, it's a overreaction or a kind of like a flare up of a certain structure. So the fascia isn't muscle, it's not tendon, it's ligament. It's like this thick fibrous band that acts as support, and that can be overused. It can exceed its capacity if you say run in bare feet, or if you walk in bare feet beyond your capacity to do so, it will start reacting.
Right.
So that's essentially what we call it. The other one that I get very often is a high hamstring tendinopathy. So a tendon that reacts, the one that attaches all the way up onto your sitting bone. It's very common with sort of sprinters and kind of triathletes and runners who decide to do a lot of hill work. The plantar fasciitis and the high hamstring tendon, they're the ones that if they're mismanaged for a long period of time, it can be very, very difficult to overcome. And I've seen people with years and years of these particular conditions. So it could be quite tricky to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Would you say there's a difference then, or is there a difference between people that do sort of different types of running, as you said, sort of hills endurance as opposed to flats and sprints and things like that?
Yeah, and it, people might think it's just running, but there's a lot of variety that comes into it, and even the runner itself. And people have different goals. People set themselves for they want to do a 5K run, and then they set themselves for a half marathon, then they set themselves for a full marathon, and just get either longer and longer or just more variety. And with that comes different loads on the body. With that comes different stresses. And yeah, then there's trail runs that can be involved. There's track, if people run around track where it's just doing circles and puts forces on the outside of one part of your body as opposed to the other.
Right.
But hills are a big one. Hills throw different loads when you go uphill and different loads when you go downhill. And we know that a lot of running injuries are due to doing too much too soon and overloading the body.
Yeah.
But there can be some subtle differences. People might have the same weekly mileage, they might have the same weekly distance, but they still get an overload injury because they have a rapid change in terrain. So they go from flats to then doing hills. That changes the load on the body, and you can still get an overload issue. Or say if you change your running technique too suddenly, or if you change your shoes to a different type of shoe too rapidly, these force quick shifts, rapid shifts in load through the body, and then you can start developing overuse injuries without even changing your mileage.
Yeah. The only thing, obviously, I don't run. I do martial arts, but I don't run. That's my exercise. But for anyone that's watched the How to Be Bazinga on YouTube, that's why I'd asked that question, because obviously he's from London, so he would have done a lot of his marathon training on the flat, just running on pavement. But then because the marathon was cancelled or whatever happened, he was doing it on like a country, like basically he was running through fields and like over sand. And he ended up like his time was screwed because he like hurt his foot and he would like stretch the tendons in or something like that, and his knee went as well. And I assume that was just obviously down to going from hard concrete on the flat to hills, muck, sand, and extra weight in your shoes, stuff like that.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing some sort of sand or dirt or uneven ground, you won't get injured if you slowly adapted to it. But if you're doing high mileage and you're doing high mileage on a road, and then quickly transfer to high mileage on the ground, even when you contact the foot on an uneven surface, even if it's just subtle, it just changes the angle of the foot, which means it shifts the load in a certain type of the foot. And if you repeat that hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundred thousands of times, every single step that you take, your tendons on that side of the foot aren't going to be used to it, and then they're going to start flaring up. And yeah, the same could be said if you adapt to grass and then go to concrete. That ground reaction force can lead to, say, stress fractures. And yeah, it's like anything. We want to try and avoid a rapid shift in change in terrain or your environment. And if you do have to change to a change in environment, we want to make sure that it's very gradual, and then the body does its fantastic thing of adapting to whatever you're putting it through, but it needs to be in slow increments, and it needs time in order to heal. You can't go straight to the gym and try and lift and try and bench 100 kilos. You need to take time to slowly adapt and slowly get stronger. And yeah, the body does great things at adapting to it.
So is it a case then of like body set, where if you run on if you do one type of running continuously and your body builds up to that, can you maintain that while also adapting to, say, running on like muck and running on hills? And can you then be as high performing on both types? Or does your body kind of need to get into that rhythm and into that sort of status of doing one or as opposed to the other?
Yeah, so it'll depend on the type of runner, what goals they have, what they want to achieve. And definitely we have road runners who are also trail runners, who are also like obstacle course runners. Like they're just depending on what you want to put your body through, but you need the specific training, and you need to, like, the body will adapt to anything. You just need to make sure the training is specific enough and offers the variety. And so one thing that runners like to do to become more resilient is, say, train with different types of shoes. Like they adapt to different types of shoes. One might be a little bit more barefoot. One might have a little bit more support. One might have a higher heel lift, that kind of thing. And if you've adapted to all those shoes, then your body starts to like become more resilient because you're changing up the variety. You're throwing something different at them every time, and they're adapting to those. And it'd be similar to someone who is a runner, but then they're also a gym goer, or they also do like say CrossFit, all these like different direction type of movements, different power movements, different like slow, heavy lifting type of things. You're just throwing one thing after another, different elements into the body. And if they adapt and they get stronger, then you become more resilient because you can almost start to throw anything at you and you've adapted to it. So that's an ideal, but it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of like rigorous training. It takes, this methodical kind of process. But because runners are this type A personality, they usually don't have the patience and they're usually a little bit too stubborn, and that's why they end up getting injured.
So if we were going to flip that to the complete other side, if someone that, like me, doesn't run at all, other than, occasionally here and there, wanted to actually get into it, become a runner, what sort of injuries can they expect in the first sort of period? And is there any way that they can mitigate those issues?
Yeah, good question. And new runners are very likely to get injured if they do so in a non-sensible approach. And it makes like the type of injury will depend on the individual. It's usually there's two things that will decide what injury occurs. One is a spike in training, and two would be like, what's your weakest link, you could say. What's your what structure, what joint will have the lowest ability to adapt, and that's usually what will turn up. So if you're doing martial arts and you're spending a lot of time, say in minimalist footwear or even barefoot, your feet are going to be really strong, and so that could be like a kind of like one of your strong points. But you might not be able to adapt to, say, hard hitting on firm surfaces like running on concrete or something like that, because martial arts are kind of like the softer kind of ground, and so you might develop shin splints. Who knows? It depends what your body, where your weakest link is. However, like I said at the start, you need two things. You need that weakest link, but you also need to overload the body to that weakest point. And no matter where your weakest point is, you won't develop an injury if you start running and you do so very gradually and you allow the body time to adapt, and you don't exceed the capacity. And so that leaves the next question of like, where should I start then? And that's where it becomes a bit of an art and a bit of a science mixed in together, because it takes someone with experience to say, Johnny, I reckon you're really strong because you've got a big history with martial arts. You've done a lot of strength training. I think your body is capable of a lot. So we might actually start with just doing running 1K and then walking for a couple of minutes, and then running 1K and walking for a couple of minutes, and then do that 3 times, see how you feel the next day, and then we'll work our way up from there. Whereas someone else who is, say, a mum or a dad and hasn't ran for 20 years and has been drinking beers and been on the couch watching footy for 3 years, and then wants to get into running because they want to lose weight and they've got this health kick. It's start of the new year and new year, new me, and then they start running. I would say, okay, let's make sure this is super gradual, because you haven't done any strength training. You're not cardiovascularly fit. You don't have that aerobic capacity. I would start maybe jogging for 1 minute and then walking for 5 minutes. Then start jogging for 1 minute, walking for 5 minutes. And let's just work our way through that process, see how you feel the next day, and then work our way up from there. And that's where the Couch to 5K is an app that people can download. It's super effective for someone who is really deconditioned and really weak and hasn't ran before. And it's just a plan, like it's automatically on your phone. And you do this, like, I think every day or like 5 days a week, something like that. And just tells you when to start walking, when to start jogging, when to start walking, when to start jogging. And eventually, as the weeks go on, you adapt. And the goal is eventually to get you to running 5K nonstop. And so apps like that and plans like that can be really, really effective, because you just follow the guidance of that app and you don't have this misguided need to try and run 5Ks off the bat, and then you just end up with Achilles issues or knee pain, that sort of thing.
So does nutrition come into it? Is that a factor? Extra protein, extra iron, extra calcium? I assume that does come into it in the injury side.
Yeah, and I think once we're getting more to the top end, similar to like team sports and like elites, the more and more the more intense your workouts get and the higher mileage the runner tends to get, the more you need to start to prioritize recovery. If someone's walking for a minute and then jogging for a minute and doing that on and off for 10 times, nutrition isn't really going to come into it. The body's just going to bounce back pretty quickly. However, if someone's training for a marathon and they've gone to doing like 20K weeks to doing 100K weeks, that's where our body needs to recover. That's where we need to prioritize a lot of recovery. And that's where sleep, stress management, nutrition all come into it. And if you're lacking in nutrition, then you really need to, you're going to be at more risk of injury because the body's just not getting its nutrients in order to recover. And sleep is a big one as well. There's been tons of studies to link poor quality sleep to a future like injury, because the same thing with nutrition. It's your rest and recovery time is when the body starts to adapt. It's when the body starts to de-stress and take on that load that you've put it through the last day. And if your sleep is inadequate, then you haven't fully recovered, and then you go into the next day to try and work pretty hard, and that's when things start breaking down.
Yeah, 100%. Like that resonates because back before I was full-time in my agency and I was still working in a bar, I would be training 2-3 times a week in the dojo, but I'd also be training at home, in between then, and do a little bit every day anyway. But then I would go into the bar and I would do like an 8-hour shift in a bar, come home, sleep, get up, do it all again. And there'd be absolutely no recovery time, and I would physically feel the effects of it. Whereas now I'm self-employed and I kind of have a better schedule around them things. Like I can train harder, faster, for longer, but I still feel better the next day because I know I can get to bed, get my 8 hours, eat properly after. I'm not scranning something quickly and trying to run to a job. I can actually sit down, make real food. As you said, like the nutritional side, making sure I've got the correct macros and stuff, and actually just look after myself a lot better. And I can really feel the difference when it comes to the training.
Yeah, absolutely. And just say, like, if you're doing an 8-hour shift work where you have to stand for 8 hours, that's still putting stress on the body. And that's definitely not like the recovery side of things. And I often see, say, plantar fasciitis, I often see people maintain their same running mileage, but all that's changed is a shift in their work, a shift in the role that they have at work, where they're now standing longer than they used to, and then they develop plantar fasciitis because it's quite a load to the body to stand still and just to walk around, low levels compared to running. But if you're doing it for 8 hours and you're replacing that with what was once recovery, laying on the couch, or even some hours of sleep, then that's when that equation tends to tip towards the breakdown rather than the rebuild side of things.
And obviously, is it possible that exercising can actually help injuries? Like, for example, before I started martial arts, I used to have a really bad back from the way I would stand and leaning over the bar with like a really deep well. And it really like affected my bottom back and my hips. So like when I started doing martial arts, my hips would click if I tried to roll from left to right with my legs open. And after training it helped. My back is at the minute great. My hips are even better than they've ever been. But I assumed at the start it was going to make it worse. I thought that was going to be the issue, that I was going to end up with more hip pain, more back pain, because I'm twisting, I'm kicking, I'm lifting these hips. But it helped. It somehow made it better, or strengthened the muscle, or whatever it done.
Yeah, I'm glad stories like that ripple into like whoever's listening, because it's a perfect example of strengthening work and rehab, and like maintaining a really strong body really helps. And if you are injured, the best evidence for you is to do some strength training around that area. We want to make sure that it doesn't flare it up, because there will be a certain capacity that will irritate a certain injury. But we still want to keep that joint or keep that structure and everything around that structure as strong as we can, because we're just building up its capacity. We're building up its ability to tolerate more and more load. And if we do it in a way that we're not overly exacerbating any injuries, then that's always a good thing. And it's often a misconception that I hear when people do get injured from running, and they think complete rest is the answer, when in fact it's not, because you're just deconditioning yourself every time you that every time the answer is complete rest, that's just deconditioning yourself. And our job as a health professional is to try and keep them as active as they can without overly exacerbating that injury. And the more active we can get without exacerbating that injury, the quicker they return and the less they decondition and they don't lose any fitness. And then they just go back into their current mileage, what they were doing beforehand. And it's a big misconception out there that resting is the key, because it just makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? Like if there's an injury, you need to completely rest, let the body heal, and then you're back into it. But often that's not the case. And often it's where injuries start to linger, and that's harder to get rid of because it's so deconditioned and it can't tolerate a lot of load after 4 or 5 weeks of rest.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, obviously, transition across a little bit. The reason you're on here isn't just because you are interested in running. Obviously, it's your business side of this. You have took your hobby, took your passion, developed it into a career and a business now. So do you want to kind of explain what it is you're doing in terms of the consultancy first? We'll hit your podcast still, but in terms of what you're doing in consultancy and physiotherapy work still?
Yeah. So even before the pandemic, I started my own online clinic. So I wanted to niche down away from private practice into the demographic that I love, which is working with runners. But often when it comes to having an injury for several months, and often like the runners I see, they've had injuries for 2, 3, 4 years. They don't need the hands-on like massage. They don't need the that physical kind of manual therapy, we call it. They need the right education. They need to address the right misconceptions that they do have in their mind. They need the strengthening. They need the right programs. They need like just guidance, and all of that can be offered online. And there has been a lot of niche online clinics popping up, and I just thought I'd give it a try. It makes total sense. I can reach everyone around the world who wants to have my expertise and guidance. And what we do is they sign up online. I've got my website. It's breakthroughrunning.physio. They book in a time. There's some forms that they get sent about their injury, questions about their injury, some tests that they do at home based on the injury that they do have. And then they write down if there's any pain, weakness, stiffness, that kind of thing. And then we jump on a call. We can analyze their running. People send me running videos of them running out on the street or on a treadmill, and we break down their technique. We talk about their shoes. Sometimes they send photos underneath their shoes for any wear and tear patterns, that kind of thing. Then I give them the advice they need. I give them the strengthening programs. I give them the running programs, and we just follow them along through their journey. Super, super effective so far. It's been almost 12 months since I saw my first client, and the results have just been amazing. And it's given me a lot of passion every day to continue serving these runners.
Awesome, man. That's incredible. And only 12 months, you said there you've been with your own private online consultancy?
Yeah, so my first paid client was November last year,
Nice.
but 2-3 months of building the website, like making sure, putting people through the right processes, just make sure everything's working before I see my first paid client. So all in all, it's been a little bit over 12 months.
Nice, man. Congratulations for that. So from what you said there, and what I had looked at as well, it seems very much like your goal is more prevention than treatment at this point. You're kind of getting ahead of the train, essentially. You're making sure they're training correctly, and they've got the correct plans in place to sort of prevent these long-term injuries affecting them.
And that's why we tend to steer away from manual therapy, because massage and things will make people feel better, but it's definitely in the short term. They're definitely like symptoms are going to return 2 days later, 3 days later, and it's the combination of like long-term strategies, which are the strengthening, the right education, like making sure they've identified the mistakes they've made in the past and making sure that doesn't happen in the future. So just learning along the process will help not only long-term outcomes, so overcome their injury for the long term, but help them prevent this particular type of injury moving forward. But there's obviously making smarter decisions, which is what my podcast is all about. Just making sure you have the right education and you are making the smarter training decisions to reduce your risk of injury. That's my whole philosophy, and that's the overall goal. But we can't get that risk down to zero. Injuries are too multifactorial to say, you're never going to get injured. Injuries happen. It's a way of life. And even though that's the goal, if injuries do arise, it's knowing the right things to do from day one in order to overcome it very quickly and make sure it doesn't come back.
Of course. So obviously from a completely, business point of view, did you find there was any barriers for entry when you wanted to obviously start this consultancy? Or was it like most online jobs, a case of learn the basics of the online part and then just set up and go?
Yeah. Oh, the big barrier was when I tell people I do online physio, they always say, how does that work? Well, I need massage, I need dry needling. How can you massage me from across the world? And that's where the education side of it comes in. And business wise, a lot of my clients are just from my podcast. They just listen to my podcast and it just naturally goes into asking me more questions and then seeing if they're appropriate for online physio. And by that stage, when they've listened to my podcast, they know that they don't need manual therapy. They know that they don't need, they need the right education. They need the strengthening. So that barrier tends to come down a little bit. But yeah, if I just see someone on the street and I say, I do online physio, that's a massive barrier. It's like, what are you talking about online physio? How the hell does that work? And that's where I have to dive into it. So yeah, a big barrier. But with this pandemic, like digital consults and telehealth are now like words that people like, it's now in the consciousness of the public. Yeah. And 100%. So that's helped me a little bit as well.
Actually, that's really interesting. And I did want to touch on this as well while we're still talking about your business. So obviously I'm a marketer from the marketing point of view, and I know there's a shit load of marketers that watch this. From a market point of view, obviously a big part for you then is going to be trying to sort of pre-educate these people, because obviously they have that stigma of questioning why it is a digital consultancy. So I assume for you, a lot of your work is trying to just, put content out, try to let people know what it is and actually how they can benefit and sort of educate people. Firstly, educate them on the benefits of your service and of the consultancy before you can even get them in to educate them on the benefits of proper training and actual having plans in place. So is that it? Just basically you need to try and educate people in the first place?
Yeah. And I've kind of stopped trying to convince runners that they need online physio. And I've just gone on the back of, let me just build this podcast. Let me just educate them so that they can educate themselves. That's the overall idea, to bring clarity and control to every runner. And they help educate themselves. They help make the same smart training decisions. But then if they need the additional help, that's when they come to me. So it's kind of just like reverse engineering. Instead of me going out and seeking injured runners that need online physio, it's helping the general like collective, or helping every runner. And then they say, hey, Brodie knows his stuff. This guy's really, really good. So that when they become injured, they make all those lessons that they've learned. Then if that's still not enough, or they just require a bit more guidance, a bit more of a tailored approach, I'm going to be the first one on their mind, because I've been the one that's taught them all that stuff. And so that's my overall goal. If someone is injured and they need the help, they need this one-on-one help, I want to be the first one on their mind to be like, Brodie's taught me all this stuff so far through the podcast, through the blogs, that sort of thing. Let me just reach out to him on social media. Let me just see what he thinks on my particular situation. And that's what generates the leads, and that's what draws the business in.
Obviously I know it is, but do you view that like as a funnel then? Like, is that part of your actual strategy to bring people? You have that built as your funnel?
Yeah. And it's been a huge shift of mine the last month or so, or probably 2 months, that I need to spend the most amount of time building the podcast. That's like where all my leads get generated. And that's where I need to spend most of the time. Because if I've got, 1,000 people listening to every episode, if that turns into 10,000, that's just a bigger base and more people getting injured, helping more people in the long run, and more people asking me for questions. And that's just how the business sort of grows and generates. So I'm really happy to take that approach. I'm really happy to work that funnel down, and and then it's just helping more people in the long run.
Nice. So is there any steps that is that your only step, just the podcast, and then obviously they flow through and come into your blogs and then that, or is there any other way you're trying to do? Are you using paid marketing for the podcast or for the business?
I am just dipping my toe into paid marketing at the moment, and just seeing what works. I don't know exactly what works at the moment. Facebook ads, I'm actually hiring a coach to teach me on Facebook ads like in the next month or so, just to see if that works as well. But it's all going to be around growing the podcast rather than generating the online business. But I do offer as well some online courses for runners, which has been quite successful now as well. So if they don't want that tailored approach, if they just want to continue learning themselves, I do have videos and all this sort of stuff to help them if they just want to learn more. So there's other income streams that I have going on as well.
Awesome. Nice. And obviously we've already mentioned your podcast, the Run Smart podcast. Links will be on screen, links will be in description. So go check that out. Give it a follow, give it a like. So do you bring guests on your podcast, or is it just every week you headshot and then just talking?
I have a couple of different episodes. So about half of it is me talking about a certain topic or what I've learned or what they need to learn. But I also get other health professionals, not just physios. I try and branch my horizons and try and understand other professionals. So I get chiros and podiatrists on, that sort of thing. Definitely a lot of researchers. I love interviewing researchers that are really well versed in the current literature, and they talk about what they've published and that kind of thing. It's really nice, and trying to get rid of the jargon so that any runner can understand that highly technical, like scientific side of things. But it's been a lot of fun that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is part of the problem. Now, I have a friend who is a physiotherapist, got a master's degree, and then went back, works for quite a few of the local sports teams. So he's like the main physio for like the main team, first team, stuff like that. But everyone else, including him, and if he listens to it, he'll know I'm talking about him. He loves to make things very complicated. The same as every other physiotherapist I've ever met. Like, they like to use their big words, and like if you say I'm knee sore, you get a 500-word essay on why your knee's sore. But I think a lot of the time people need someone like you, someone who can just break it down and give them in very simple terms, A, B, C, D for A, B, C, D results. And I think more people need it. Same with everything. I mean, it's the same with marketing. It's the same with anything people are doing. People try to make it very complicated because I think people assume if they use lots of big words and big sentences, it sounds better and they look better. Whereas really, I think when you just cut away half the crap and just tell people what they need to know, what they want to know, they appreciate it so much more, and you're going to gather so much more of a better following from it.
Yeah, and often when people are like, what's the right type of health professional I go see, I say it's the one that you walk away with more clarity, because it takes a bit of guts for an injured person to try and ask questions to their health professional, like even their doctor, dentist, like ask the right type of questions. It's really easy just like let them do their thing. But if they ask the question, they come back with a complicated answer that they don't understand, it's gutsy again to try and ask for clarification. And the ones that do aim to educate the client with and be like, do you have any more questions? Does that make sense? You sure you get everything that happens? They walk away with clarity and they walk away with a bit of reassurance. That's the type of approach that you really want, instead of just being puzzled the entire time.
Nice. I wish I remember who said this, but the quote is, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. Yeah, which I try to take into every client meet. So like every time I sit down, like, I mean, social media marketing, digital marketing has so many acronyms, has so many fancy terms, and you can make things very complicated. But if I go in and sit down and try and pitch that to a client, they might think it sounds good, but they don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Like, they have no clue. But if I go in there and say, this is the simplified version of it, and they go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yeah, that'll do. Perfect. You're going to win. You're going to win out 9 times out of 10 just by simplifying it and making it so much easier for people to understand. Because if they understand it, especially in market, if they understand it, they understand the value.
Yeah, agreed.
So with the podcast, obviously, as you say, you have a couple of different types of episodes you put out. Have you any big episodes planned? Have you any sort of big projects coming up with the podcast?
I usually just truck along. I release 2 episodes a week at the moment, so I'm pumping them out pretty quickly. And I just like, I've got a couple of big guests coming up, which I think are big, which like you probably have no idea who they are, but that like researchers and people that I love following. And as soon as there's a guest on that really has delved into the research around like a really common myth and misconception that's out there, I just love delivering that to runners. So yeah, I just get excited about that.
See, my problem is trying to get, like, at the minute, I'm starting to run into the problem with guests. Because obviously, like when you start out, you have a long list of people you can just kind of call on friends of friends. That's easy. But then I've hit the point now where I'm like, I really need to like find better methods to finding people. Because it's all right. I've done a lot in the music scene, the music industry, and I love doing them ones. So they are my interest in it. But I want to start getting, as you say, like researchers, authors, like, and I think the hardest part is knowing how to find these people and bring them in. And I mean, other podcast hosts that I'm friends with, and guest podcasts, they find it, the struggle is finding people. So how do you find your people? Obviously, I mean, yours are probably harder to find than mine. I'm just trying to find people that have a good passion. You're trying to find actual academic people,
Yeah,
academic people.
I guess, but it's within the same niche that I know. Like I socialize with a lot of people, I network with a lot of people, and we all kind of know all these people together that we can introduce and collaborate with and build that. But with your like project passion, it's like finding people is like, could be anyone. It could be musicians, it could be like, you know, artists, it could be like health professionals. So it's really hard to go out and search for any particular niche. But even though some of my guests are quite elites and best in the world, like I'll know someone who knows the best in the world and they can refer me or they can introduce me and see if that's a good fit, and it all just naturally collects. And every time I have a guest on, anyone I have a podcast host on, I always say like, who can I send your way that will be a good source of collaboration? We all just like kind of work together and just naturally just links up and flows.
Nice. So if someone out there was a physiotherapist like you were yourself, and they wanted to do the same thing, they wanted to get into more the digital and online space, they, you know, maybe they think that they're better suited at, you know, doing martial arts physiotherapy, but online like you're doing. How would you kind of give them the steps to success, or at least sort of the pathway to get started with doing that?
There's some courses you can do around starting an online clinic, which is what I did. It was one in Australia, but I'm sure there's tons around the world that you can actually do. Just start. Like it doesn't need to be too complicated as long as you're following your national kind of board guidelines and that kind of thing. I think Zoom has its problems with like privacy. Like you want to make sure the platform itself is safe and you're making the right documentation. But it's really not that hard. You just buy some software that like a booking calendar where you can type your notes and document all those. And there's a lot of software now that there's several options to choose from, which just like start an online clinic and just buy the software, which is only costs like a certain percent per month or a certain amount per month. And then you've got your booking system, you put it on, you plug it onto a website, and then you're good to go. It's really easy to set up. I use Clinico if anyone's a health professional that wants to start, and it's super cheap, and it does the booking system for you, it does the notes. It actually starts to, now it has the function to do online, kind of like a Zoom call. So it has that functionality, and that's all you need to get started. So this day and age is super, super easy.
Nice. So obviously you have your podcast, you have your Instagram, you have your blogs. Do you do YouTube? Do you have content going out through there as well?
No, I'll probably delve into YouTube later in life, but you can't do everything. You know, if you start doing everything, it starts to dilute a little bit. Well, that's my belief anyway. You probably tell me otherwise, but I find just like I'm doing really well on Instagram. I get a lot of engagement on Instagram, and I'm doing really well with the podcast and growing the podcast. So I just keep to a couple of things and make sure I do it really well.
I mean, personally speaking, I tell you not to do the YouTube. It's a lot of extra work having to edit a podcast and the video, and then worry about your other video content to go out at the same time. So, I mean, as you say, like it's a lot of work, and then as you say, like it dilutes down what you're trying to do, and you may not then have the time for your consultancy or to do putting out your 2 episodes a week. And obviously, you've just said growing your podcast is your main concern, your main priority. So that's obviously where the time needs to be spent, pumping out 2 episodes a week on that.
Yeah.
So would you have any final roundup tips for anyone that is starting to run, or, you know, in fact, beginner, intermediate, expert runners, anyone?
Be patient. Make sure you allow the body time to adapt. And if you do get injured, make sure you take the right steps from day one and not just run through an injury, wait till it's way too severe, and then decide to get it treated.
Nice. So that's it for this week, guys. Thank you, Brodie, for coming on. Appreciate it. I'm sure we'll get speaking to you again at some point. Give you another year and see where your consultancy's at then.
I'd love that. Thanks for having me on.
Well, that's it, guys. That's it for this week. We'll be back again next week. We will have another guest on the show. There is also a couple of different things coming up in regards to content types and the type of podcast we're going to be doing. But as usual, guys, if you're watching the video version on YouTube, hit like, hit subscribe. It is appreciated. If you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, feel free to follow the podcast, hit the review, leave a review. I know sometimes it takes a minute, but it is appreciated and it does help me out, beats that algorithm. As always, guys, you'll get my Twitter handle on screen and down below in the description. Same as all Brodie's links will also be down in the description. So please go across, check him out, give him a follow on Instagram, hit a couple of likes, check out his podcast. If you're a runner and you have questions, as Brodie says, hit him up, get on Instagram, get him followed, drop him a message, and I'm sure he'll be glad to at least point you in the right direction. And that's it for this week, guys. I will see you next week.
Hello guys, how you doing? It's me, Jack, mate. You've just finished watching probably one of the best videos on YouTube. So why not take a moment to consider subscribing? And if you haven't already, hit the like button and turn the notification bell on. Apparently it helps. I don't know how. It was good to know, wasn't it?